Look who's back. Our favorite Monday morning quarterback, senior NFL reporter, Ohio State apologist, Albert Breer, back on the program. How are you, Albert?
I'm good. How you doing? I
Eh,
don't know if apologist is the right term. Maybe realist. I think I'm a
Bro,
realist now
okay.
after the last 3 years. Yeah.
All right. Ryan Day, if he doesn't beat Michigan this year, what happens?
Um, I think you're right to bring up the different circumstance now where we've all had that thought in our head, like what would it feel like to win a national championship if you didn't beat Michigan? And that always seemed unrealistic because generally the team that loses that game, now there's been exceptions, but generally the team that loses that game is out of the race for the national title. That's not the case anymore. So I think it's a little harder to answer that question, but I think, like you look at the resources that have been sunk into this year, the amount of guys that are coming back, the 3-year losing streak to Michigan, and even like the availability of somebody like Mike Vrabel, which like if the season doesn't go the right way, you know how these things can work.
Mm.
Guys can hover over certain jobs, and the same way Jim Harbaugh once upon a time hovered over the Michigan job. I think Mike Vrabel could wind up hovering over the Ohio State job. Just like a lot of things at work that put a lot of pressure on Ryan going into the year. I think he's going to do a great job. I think on balance, outside of those 3 Saturdays, he has done a really good job. But there's no question there's a ton of pressure on him.
Plus, if you don't meet Michigan this year, and Jim Harbaugh is not even there, like
Yeah.
it just like Sharon Moore is your new head coach there. But yeah, a lot of pressure. I'm trying to think if there's a coach who has more pressure on him this year. I guess Kalen DeBoer, taking over for
Yeah.
Nick Saban. Can you think of any? Mike McCarthy?
I was going to say Mike
I
McCarthy.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
I mean,
I
Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia, I think is
oh
a good
yeah,
one.
yeah,
And I think that pressure was underscored by like we were talking about him being fired 12 months after he made the Super Bowl,
I know.
and they got rid of both of his coordinators. And so now he's working with two guys, who's had like, designs on being a head coach and who's, interviewed for a boatload of jobs and Kellen Moore on offense, and then on defense, Vic Fangio, who had a little bit of a sideways experience the last time around and was a head coach before. It's just I think you look at the circumstances facing Sirianni there, the amount of money they've got sunk into this team, and the way that they've spent cash over cap, and how close they got 2 years ago, and how ownership feels about that roster, and how there's a track record there of having a quick trigger finger. They did with Doug Peterson. You could say they did with Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly won 10 games 2 years in a row. They go 5-11, boom, he's gone. So. I think Nick Sirianni would be on the list of guys who have a lot of pressure on them. And the interesting thing is, I think with these teams in the NFC East, we talk about somebody hovering over a job. I mean, maybe the greatest coach of all time is hovering over an entire division going into the 2024 season.
Well, I wondered about this. I said this last hour that you have your coach and your quarterback in the
Mhm.
last year of their contracts.
Yep.
Um,
Best receiver, maybe best player, and Micah Parsons with 2 years left. Yeah.
but who's more likely to be back there next year, Dak or Mike McCarthy?
Dak, I think. I'd say Dak. I mean, I think what they're wrestling with Dak again, like I sort of look at it similar to like where the Rams were at the end with Jared Goff, where they still liked Jared Goff, but they had wrestled with how they paid him and his value. And look, like I think in a weird way, they've both been proven right, because the Rams went out and won a Super Bowl with Stafford, and now Goff has completely revitalized his career and changed the narrative that followed him around completely. So in that circumstance, both Goff and the Rams somehow wound up being right. I think that's possible in this situation too. Where I don't think the Cowboys are wrestling with can Dak Prescott, win in the playoffs for us? Can Dak Prescott be the answer for the next 5 years? Can Dak Prescott remain, within the top 10 or so quarterbacks in the league? I think it's more, do we want to have this number on our books affixed to this particular player? And that's why I think it was so hard the first time around, when they struggled and went through a franchise tag with him and got to a second franchise tag with him and finally signed him and cost themselves a lot of money in the process. It's almost like they're doing that all over
I
again.
know. Yeah.
And, you do wonder, like, if there comes a point when they say, all right, enough's enough. We're going to just go into the year and let him play out the contract, knowing it's basically going to be impossible to franchise him after the year. So he's got almost a completely open road to free agency if he wants to take it.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's this mutual agreement that Dak's just going to play this year, and then
Yeah.
let's see what happens when all's said and done. And if Dallas is good, maybe Mike McCarthy stays. If not, Bill Belichick, come on
Yeah.
down.
It's weird because, like, I said this, I've said this over the last couple of months when people have asked me, like, which is the most urgent of these situations? And again, you have your quarterback, your coach, and your best player, that, I think all want new contracts, right? I think it actually is none of those three that's the most urgent. I think it's CD Lamb, because CD Lamb's the one who was, I think, showed over the last 2 months that he's willing to push the envelope on this. And he is going into a contract year, and the circumstances at his position have changed. And the market's exploded. I mean, there's a reason why the Dolphins were so aggressive with Jalen Waddle. The Texans were so aggressive with Nico Collins. The Lions were so aggressive with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, those teams did those deals early. The Eagles with Devontae Smith, like, those teams did those deals early because they knew Justin Jefferson was coming down the pike. Now you have the Cowboys and Niners sitting over here, and it's like, sorry, price has changed. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Justin Jefferson got paid, and now that number's 35, and maybe you don't have to give these guys 35 million, but they're going to want something closer to it than what Waddle and Smith and Nico Collins and Amon-Ra St. Brown got. So that's a complicated one. And, obviously he's not planning on showing up to camp, and has shown a willingness to go to the mat with the Cowboys to get what he wants.
He's Albert Breer, the Monday Morning Quarterback, senior NFL reporter. The Belichick open invitation to join the Niners with Kyle Shanahan, Tim Kawakami just kind of throws that out.
Yeah.
Anybody given a heads up that this was a possibility prior to hearing that answer from Shanahan?
I don't think anybody knows the relationship between the two of them. Would be surprised by that at all. That Kyle would do that. Obviously, they had an opening for a defensive coordinator. But I also know, like, the way both those guys think. And there are, I'm going to try to say this delicately without making them sound like egomaniacs. I think that those two guys probably feel like there's a small group of coaches who really, really know what they're doing. You know what I mean? And can coach any position and are really good situationally and know how to manage a team. And, like, I think those two guys view each other as peers in that way, despite the age difference, And I think, like, Bill viewed Kyle's dad that way, and viewed him as being in the same class. And so I think, given the opportunity to bring that sort of institutional knowledge and brain power aboard, Kyle Shanahan was always going to do it. So, like, whether it was as a defensive coordinator or a senior assistant or a consultant or whatever it was, those guys have had enough conversations over the years. I mean, those guys did the Jimmy Garoppolo deal one-on-one, Those guys have had enough conversations over the years where I think they've got a pretty good idea of how the other one works. And, I think Kyle would have told you 3 or 4 years ago, like, if Bill ever walks away from New England, I'd jump at the chance to bring him in here.
The 18-game schedule.
Yep.
Now it's out. Now it's up for grabs that we get to talk about it. I did talk to a source this morning who said that it's just a lot of posturing, and the players would have to get, in his words, a massive, massive deal.
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's no negotiations going on, but it's out there now. And the commissioner, once the commissioner kind of puts his holy water on it, it feels like now all of a sudden it's open for debate here. Yeah. We put the over-under at 2027 to go to 18 games. Where would you, because the collective bargaining agreement expires in 2030.
Yep.
Do you think they open it up or add an addendum and we have 18 games scheduled in 2027?
I think the key is there's an opt-out. I believe it's after 2029 in the broadcast deals. So like to me, and you know how this stuff works, Dan, like I think they'd want to have this in place before then. So when they're negotiating with the networks and the streaming services and everybody else, they're negotiating with a bigger piece of real estate than they have right now. So my feeling is that they would probably want to get this in place before negotiating the new broadcast deals, assuming they'll opt out. And based on what we just saw the NBA get, I'd say there's probably a 99% chance out of 100 that they do opt out after 2029. Um, as for what it's going to take to get 18 games, I want to be really clear about this. The players cannot bargain away like off-season program stuff or anything like that that owners don't care about anymore. I mean, I think it's just like the owners view those as opportunities to shut the lights out and not pay bills for another 3 or 4 weeks. You know what I mean? Like they have to get the owners where it hurts. And I think one of the ways they can do that is to find a way to get guys paid faster. And if I'm the players, what I'm looking at is I'm saying I want loosening of the rules on franchise tags, where you make it harder to franchise tag a guy. I'm not saying get rid of them, but make it harder to franchise tag a guy, right? And then I want guys to get to free agency earlier. Now the problem with this stuff sometimes can be that the older players control the negotiation. So the older players might be less concerned with a guy getting to free agency after 3 years instead of 4. But the reality is, guys getting to free agency faster, guys getting paid faster is going to help everybody. It's going to push the market every which way. It's going to, I think really impact the chance that they eventually get to more fully guaranteed contracts. So I think it has to be something like that. It has to be some measure of control over the workforce that you're taking away from the owners. And I think, the ways that you do that is, you find a way to make it easier for guys to get to free agency, both through the numbers of years of service it takes to get there, and by maybe tearing down some of the walls that the franchise tags create to star players getting there.
Paulie brought this up years ago of a separate cap for quarterbacks. And then that story came out, I think, in the last 6 months or so, and I don't know if they're running it up the flagpole. Could you ever see where we separate the quarterback from the rest of the roster when it comes to salary cap?
Yeah, I just don't know how functionally that would work.
Okay.
I mean, I guess you have to do it like a Larry Bird rule, like, right? Like, or the NBA, if it's your own home. I think the rule was that, and I know there's still kind of like, there are offshoots of it, but like where you can pay your own player whatever you want. Maybe it would be something like that, and you reward a team for having a homegrown guy, or they're allowed to pay a guy over a certain amount, and then the cap charge is capped. Like, say, all right, like you can pay him whatever you want if you drafted and developed him, right? And you can pay him 60, but we're only going to charge you for 40. Maybe it'd be something like that.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think you'd have to get creative with it. Because I do think, like, in the minds of a lot of people working in the league, it does help with competitive balance. The team with an elite quarterback can't just load up, and the team with an elite quarterback has to build creatively and differently. It challenges the teams that have those guys. And you can say that, yes, it's punishing teams for getting it right at quarterback, and that's definitely true. But the flip side of it is, if the greater good is to have more teams closer to 500, more teams at the end of the race at the end of the year, more teams in it, then I think the way that it's set up right now actually is probably a better solution.
Always great to talk to you. We'll keep bothering you during the off season and during the regular season. He's the Monday morning quarterback, Albert Breer. Thank you, Albert.
All right, thanks, Dan.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll get to your phone calls coming up after this.